Okay, so why don't we do that? I will share my screen in a moment. And what I'm going to ask everyone is when we present, we are slated to spend approximately 15 minutes per presentation. So what I will do is Dr. Pennington will go through ours first. And if there are any questions, then we'll ask the team if there's any questions. And if not, we will go on to the next presenters. So I am going to start our presentation first. My name is Christopher Dignam, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Lisa Pennington, and we are from Governor State, just outside Chicago and Illinois. So I'm going to throw this over to Dr. Pennington now. Our title is P-20 Educational Leadership, Facilitating Responsive Pre-Service Teacher and Instructional Leadership Practices through Distributive Leadership. Can everyone see the screen we're sharing?
I can see it.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So just really quickly, kind of the purpose behind our presentation, what we wanted to do, we're thinking about, of course, always supporting our students with diverse backgrounds and how we can prepare educators at all levels from pre-service teachers up through superintendents to do that. Next one, please, Chris. So what we're using in Illinois is the state passed something called the Culturally Responsive Teaching and Leading Standards. So we are in the process of implementing these at all levels. And the whole goal of this is to prepare educators, again, across all programs at all levels of schools to be more culturally responsive to their students. So today we want to hopefully in our brief time provide a brief overview of practices, again, for everybody from pre-service teachers up through superintendents, so that they're able to support all of the diverse students within their classrooms through classroom leadership all the way up through leadership at the district levels. So again, just cultural responsiveness, the definitions we're working with. This is including students' cultural references and aspects of learning. This is helping provide educators at all levels a framework and approaches to instruction, to leadership, to discussing information for learning. And all this, of course, we're tying back to John Dewey's work in progressive education.
So in piggybacking off of what my colleague, Dr. Pennington, has noted, when we look at culture responsive teaching, and again, Illinois and some other states in the union have passed mandated that schools or districts or universities at a certain period of time, and in Illinois is 2025, employ culture responsive teaching and leadership. So in this case, it's involving the families of students, native languages into classrooms, understanding the history and culture of our students, and that the community of culture that we develop within the classroom supports those culture responsive teaching and leadership aspects. Now, in terms of what Dr. Pennington and I are looking at for this construct is that if we have a system of supports that are in place for making learning relevant, it needs to employ leadership from our schools and our districts, as well as in our classrooms. So it's the teacher seeing himself or herself as an instructional leader, the principal as an instructional leader, superintendent as an instructional leader. And from that, what we have in place here is something called distributive leadership. And it's essentially a shared leadership where members of the teams are going to include their voice in providing equity and access for education, as well as culturally rich curriculum and educational goals. Now, for this to occur, we need to have in place a unified structure. And that's what we're looking at here as a way to provide some type of visual literacy for any of our stakeholders we could use, from early childhood through higher education. These would be our community members and our employees within the district. But when we have equitable practices in place, when we practice culturally relevant teaching and leadership, it's embedded in everything. It's not just in a unit of study. It's not just something you cover or that you have niceties with students and you believe it makes them feel welcome. It's empowering students through embedding that in your instruction, the time that you're providing teachers for instructional time and planning, interventions, whole child approach, early learning. The family involvement, academic engagement piece is huge. So something like Joyce Epstein's 6 pillars of parental involvement. Those are very, very big. Moving towards the outside, funding those. So if we have these constructs in place, we must fund them, provide diverse, inclusive schools. Leadership quality it requires that type of training that our teachers and leaders are going to be immersed in, and in learning ready facilities. A wonderful quote that we found that sort of gives us an idea of where we're going with all of this comes from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. When we look at a step-by-step, action by action, decision by decision, turn of the flywheel, what we're saying is that those discrete, quiet, deliberate processes of figuring out what needs to be done and creating best future results, and not just in a gratuitous way where we're making slogans and logos and putting them in front of our homes or in front of our schools that say we're a welcoming community, when it's just something that we do just to say we do it. So it has to be deliberate, and it's not always something that you're using for your self-promotion of your school or district. And that's a leadership issue. And when we look at the moral purpose of teaching and learning, it's acting with the intention of making a positive difference in the lives of others. That's also interwoven within servant leadership and within distributive leadership, where that leadership norm is actually not just the principal leading. It's not the assistant principal leading or the superintendent. It's teachers, it's your support staff, it's your non-licensed staff, and it's engaging and learning for a meaningful teaching and learning experience. So everyone is on that flywheel, and everyone's a spoke in the wheel in the school. And so when we look at distributive leadership and what Dr. Pennington and I are examining for building capacity, we expand boundaries of leadership by empowering others, especially teachers, rising administrators, and that we're going to connect now to, in our moment, to our work with early childhood through higher education, teaching and leading. We construct facilities of ownership of outcomes by creating opportunities in others to lead. That is going to result in ownership. So people are going to own what they create. And so the shared model, it's capacity building. It's creating a community of practice that everyone has their hands in. Now, in reality, you're going to have reluctant employees in any profession, including early childhood through higher ed. But if someone is resistant and they do not participate, they've had the chance to, and it's sort of like being able to vote and not voting. You didn't, choose to vote, and you can't complain what happened. So, leaders need to be intentional when we look at those practices and not make excuses for others. And also, sometimes you need to make and say tough things to enlist your staff and everyone that you want to involve. Now, school districts have strategic plans. And when we look at strategic systems for vision of school system and success, Dr. Pennington and I were both K-12 teachers, teacher leaders. I served as a principal in a few different districts, urban and suburban in Illinois and Chicago, as well as superintendent. And we look at processes and procedures and systems that allow leaders to measure, monitor, structure, and policy. A big part of it is our community engagement. We have this wheel here of things from teaching, leadership, accountability. Community engagement is a big piece in this research, because at any given time in your school population of K-12, 80% of your school population that lives in that area, that reporting area, does not have a child in your school during the current school year. They may in the future, they may have in the past. 80% does not. So if you're creating systems of structures in place for involving others, this community engagement piece is a big part. And for a strategic school design framework, employing a strong vision, the resources are big. Again, this is embedded in your practice, whether it's with your athletic director, your grounds and facilities, your instruction, or those things that you say around your building about being a welcoming community. It requires time, attention, collaboration. It's the whole child, and it is something that is also talent management. You need to be deliberate. When I would hire, I would say we hire in our image. And it's not a religious connotation. It means our standards and our practices, and maybe this is not the best employee for our school or our district. And we need to be very deliberate with that they reflect our culture and values. So in summing this up, some strategies for creating support of learning environments, whether they are our pre-service teachers, our prep programs, even our rising administrators, our current teachers who want to be a principal. It's context foundational terms. How do you really employ this? What do we really do? What's your positionality? I bring something based on my life experiences to my school, either as a teacher or a leader, or as a teacher leader, and the historical context of our understandings. And through our education programs in higher education, we must be very deliberate in communicating, a mutual understanding of those practices, how it is diversified in our curriculum, the evidence of responsive knowledge. That's a big piece, as a leader, I'm very concerned with, because we have schools and districts pouring a lot of money into equity positions and directors, even assistant superintendents, but are they measuring impact? Because if they're not, then it's about the adults and it's not about kids. And so as leaders, we need to, face those very, firm realities. Now for school-based district administrator candidates, licensure. We have abilities in our higher education systems to embed those leadership standards in our coursework. It's not just one course you take and there's some coursework in it on community building and distributive leadership and culturally responsive teaching and leading or equity. It's interwoven, and there are work products, because everyone who goes through an internship in terms of leadership for, assistant principals, superintendents, they have to produce some type of work product, usually a portfolio. So embed it across every class that someone's taking. For practicing educators, these are teachers who are already in positions. Some of them may have been in positions for the last 30 years before they've had to have this type of work come up. And some of them have been doing it because it was embedded in their higher education courses. But diverse teaching and learning, curricular learning, connecting current events and standard to our teaching and learning, and building skills in students for empowering them. There should be student voice. We're not providing those opportunities for our students. That's kind of a problem. And for practicing principal considerations, we have principals in our programs with Dr. Pennington and I at our university for individuals who want to be superintendents. Are they there to empower others and to practice shared leadership, facilitate ownership of highly responsive instructional leading outcomes, leading curriculum. We're responsible for the change. If we actually employ distributed leadership in the leadership courses we offer at higher ed, then our candidates, they have an ownership of the outcomes that they create. We monitor those, and we engage in school community for communicating an asset mindset. That's a big problem right now that we see in many schools and districts. It's a deficit mindset. It's what's not being done, what can't be done. It's all those nots. And it's like, what can we do? And so that asset mindset is a positive step, and that's something that we need to look at. For a practicing superintendent, we have those as well in our programs that are earning their doctorates. Empower individuals throughout the organization. The superintendent is there to serve the community. The community does not serve the superintendent. Inspire principal teams to hold principals accountable. Funding and training, obviously that's very costly, and usually it takes like 2 years to plan out for this. So that's why sometimes education moves at a glacial speed. And that board governance is a big piece, because for a superintendent, the number one job is managing your board. If you're not managing your board, you're not going to be able to manage your district. So your board should be trained on the practices and policies and culture that you're embracing. In higher ed, closing, embrace P-20 educational leadership that employs a distributive construct. When we do that, we are empowering, we're enabling our pre-service teachers all the way through our superintendent candidates for ensuring shared leadership for communal ownership of outcomes. And so those are areas that we are exploring in our research, and areas that we think are extremely important for ensuring ownership of all of the decisions we're making from early childhood through higher education. So thank you for your time. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Pennington or myself?